guys, I thought it would be fun today to make a quick and dirty guide to recognizing past life dreams. I wanted to make this video because I think that a lot of people are really curious about their past lives, and they think that it has to be like this big effort that they need to make in order to figure out what might have happened in another lifetime. But the truth is that you might actually be receiving past life impressions through your dreams without even realizing it, because when you're in this really relaxed state in the middle of the night, it's totally possible for your subconscious to be feeding you bits and pieces or patterns that your soul has been working through. And I think one of the most common misconceptions that people likely have about past life dreams is that they're going to be obvious. That is where people get stuck. They assume that if it doesn't look obviously from another time, from another place, if the architecture doesn't look different, if the clothing doesn't look different, if the food is not different, if you don't look different, they assume that it's not a past life dream. No, you could be having past life dreams in so many forms. So yeah, I get excited about this topic because I have been having past life dreams for like over 30 years. So let's dive in. The first way you can recognize a past life dream is actually the obvious, that it really does look like it's another time, another place. You are another you. Not all of these elements have to converge within the same dream. You know, maybe some things will look modern, or maybe you will be in a setting that you do recognize as another era, but you look like you do today, which obviously in a past life you didn't. But just throwing this out there because yes, sometimes you will get very clear imagery from the previous existence that comes through in a dream, and that's often a big clue that what's happening in the dream is relevant information in your karmic processing. More commonly though, in fact I would say much more commonly, the past life aspect of the dream comes through in a much more subtle fashion. So it could be that everything looks like the modern era and the activity is something from another life. You know, this happens to me sometimes. Like I have this recurring theme in a dream that I am in Berlin and I need to make plans to leave Berlin by train right away. Sometimes this looks like another era, or parts of it look like another era. Sometimes it looks like today. So yeah, sometimes it has more to do with the activity. The activity feels like something from the past, but maybe the setting looks just like it does now. Likewise, the past life information can come through in a more metaphorical sort of way. So like, you know, you have to kind of read between the lines of what the different elements of your dream represent. You have to analyze them, like a literature major might analyze symbolism, which luckily for me, I was a literature major, so this is very easy. As an example, like I had a dream one time that I was riding in this car in my hometown with guys who I understood to be immigrants, and you know, like this was like a sequence that looked modern in the middle of a larger past life narrative, like a larger blatantly past life dream. And what I realized later, a few months later, when I met people that I realized reminded me of these men from the car, and I thought, oh my god, I think they were the guys from the dream. What I realized was that the whole idea of hometown and immigrants, they were metaphors. My hometown, my current life hometown, didn't represent that I lived there in another life as well. It represented the idea of like, this is a thing that happened in the place where I was from. And the idea of these men being immigrants actually represented like, these were men who came to that city from a whole other country. So this is what I mean by metaphors. Sometimes your past life information is going to come through in a little bit of like a jumbled way. And to be honest with you, I'm not really sure why this happens. I think it's simply because it's not always essential in processing your past life stuff to understand the exact details of exactly what happened. It's much more important to understand what kinds of scenarios you might have been experiencing and how those affected you emotionally. That's the important part, because the emotional experience, the choices you made, that is essentially the core of your karma and the stuff that you might want to heal. I think another reason that things might look more modern instead of old is that when we were experiencing them, our authentic emotional experience in the other life wasn't like, oh, this is an old-fashioned world. It was like, our experience at the time was, this is here, this is now. Nothing looked foreign, nothing looked exotic. So, you know, when you're in your current life now and you're dreaming this, the memory is coming through, there's a part of you that remembers it that way. There's a part of you that remembers it as here and now. So it's like when your current life brain is feeding you the imagery in your dream, it's feeding it to you as here and now. But it does not mean that what is happening in the dream is not actually from another life. Past life dreams get super interesting when you have your soulmates in them and you can sort of kind of recognize who these characters are, because they won't always look like themselves, but you'll often like feel the same way around them, or you'll wake up thinking like, no, this person looked nothing like the guy that I dated last summer, but he was the guy I dated last summer, that kind of thing. So when your soulmates are involved, it's really cool because you start seeing little glimpses of what kind of karma you're working through. The best example I could give you of how this might manifest in a dream is something like, you know, there is a person in my current life that the dynamic that I always had with this person was generally something like, I will speak when spoken to. That's just the better way to handle things. And funny enough, I started having dreams years ago that were set in another time. And in these dreams, actually, he was a spy and I was a spy. And my dynamic with him was very much speak when spoken to. And I used to think that these dreams were just projections of my current life and my emotional process. But then after a few years of these dreams, I started to realize, yeah, maybe this is an old pattern. Maybe part of the reason that we have this kind of dynamic now is actually because back then it was like a life or death thing that I don't initiate conversations, I wait until I'm spoken to and then I reply. So if you have like a weird dynamic with somebody or it doesn't have to be weird, it could be any kind of dynamic, but you have a dream where your interactions with this person there's something very poignant about them and it reflects how things are in the now. And especially if you repeatedly see this theme coming up in dreams, that actually might be karma that you carry from another life with that person. And it's your soul's way of trying to show you like, hey, this is an issue you could actually shift. Like this is something you could work on. So that's another fun thing to consider. Another general theme of like sign for a past life dream, for me actually comes down to how it affects my sleep. So sometimes I will have a dream and it'll wake me up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh yeah, I think that was from another lifetime, but I want more rest. And I'll keep trying to sleep, but it's like something inside of me is practically shouting, write it down, write it down. And I actually am completely unable to fall asleep until I write it down. Or alternatively, I will have a dream that is kind of weird and I will wake up in the middle of the night, like the dream reaches a point where it shakes me out of sleep, but then I fall back to sleep into exactly the same dream and it just continues. So I feel like that's another really powerful sign. It's like your soul is trying to show you this is important for you to be seeing. Like even sleep is not going to break it. You need to understand, you need to watch what's going on. If you are woken up by some sort of emotional climax, in my experience, that is another frequent sign of a past life dream. Often what I find is that happens with the dreams that are particularly traumatic, when there's something like really heavy going on. I feel that the reason that we're woken up just before this, it's not just because we're afraid and our brain is, ringing the alarms to stir us out of it. I think it's also because we don't have to necessarily relive all of our pain from our other lifetimes in all of its unglory. I think sometimes it's just important for us to see what happened and understand how we felt about it. And usually these moments that were traumatizing, they left really powerful karmic impressions on us. So I think that's why we see them, and I think that's why we are kind of allowed to start experiencing the emotions of them again in our sleep, where we're safe. Because that really stays with us, and it's a very clear sign that there's something there, there's something to look at, but it's not necessary for us to see exactly what happened after. So the most disturbing example that I had from a past life dream was like, I was hiding in an apartment and this guy came in, found me there, and then he started interrogating me. This man was in uniform, and I was getting increasingly scared and he was getting increasingly frustrated with me because I was not giving him the kind of answers that he wanted. In some cases, I was not giving him any answers at all. Eventually, the dream reached this point where he just like lunged at me and grabbed my throat, and I woke up immediately. I was like, oh my God. And the crazy thing is that when I woke up, I was checking my email then for a distraction, and I received an email while I was dreaming this from this guy who was my closest friend of the time. And he was like, hey, I just suddenly out of nowhere got this really strong sense of worry about you. Are you okay? So yeah, it was super crazy. But that brings us to our next possible sign that you are having a past life dream. And it's that you actually get a sign in your waking life that this was more than a dream. Namely, if you are having a past life dream and then you wake up and you're like, I'm not really sure what to make of that. Maybe that was just like a really intense projection of all of my emotional trash right now. And you're tempted to dismiss it. If it's really important for your spirit that you consider, hey, maybe this was real, then you will often see some kind of synchronicity in your waking life that points back to the contents of that dream. Sometimes the confirmation might just be over something really small, like you received a detail in the dream that points toward a name or a place name or something like that, or a profession, whatever. It doesn't always have to be of hefty karmic significance. Sometimes our soul just likes to float us little confirmations because it's fun, because it's cool. It's cool to remember these things if we can. So yeah, if you wake up and you receive some more than a coincidence kind of nudge after the dream that points back to what was happening in the dream, that's often a really big sign that even if it didn't look blatantly from another time, like the dream where this guy is in uniform and he's interrogating me, parts of it actually looked very modern. Even if your dream has looked modern and it's not obviously from a past life, a lot of the time that sort of clue that happens after the dream, it's your proof that it was from another life. On a related note, it is very likely a past life dream if you learn a historical detail within the dream that you have never heard anywhere else and there was no way you could have known. In one of my dreams, one of my many dreams where I am a spy, I was interacting with another spy, and it was that he gave me a book of poetry and we had identical copies of the book. So he would actually communicate through this book of poetry to give me messages. And it was something like, I carried this book everywhere. It looked really nondescript, so people would just think I was this girl who liked reading her poetry on the train. But I would actually have to wait for phone calls, and in the phone call, I would be given a set of numbers, and the numbers would indicate like a page and a line or something like that. And that would be where I would have to like decipher what the message was. So I woke up and I was thinking like, that's super cool. That sounds like a really cool way to communicate with people. But I just assumed it was a projection from my waking life where I occasionally play with books, usually books of poetry, for divination. I'll open to a random page and put my finger down on a random line and I'll think, oh, there's my answer. Sometimes you can't take it seriously, but sometimes it's really fun. But anyway, I was thinking it's because I do this in my waking life, but I learned 3 years after the dream that apparently during World War II, there were actually spies that communicated through books. They would have identical copies of a book and they would select a very specific line, and that line would be like their cipher or something. And then that would be how they would send their code. And when I read that, it was like this total mind explosion. I was like, oh my God, that might have actually been real. So if you have learned something in a dream that you have no way of knowing, and then might not be immediately, but whenever you learn after the fact that this was a thing that happened, that dream was probably real. Finally, the biggest sign for me that a dream is actually from another life is if I am not the only one who has that dream, or at least I am not the only one who dreams of a particular event. So, for instance, one night, this still blows my mind, about 7 years ago, I had a dream that involved me learning a patriotic song and dance routine in this combination gymnasium auditorium. And I was there with a particular friend, and she was wearing a particular dress. And then for whatever reason, I understood her to be in danger, and I was trying to get her out of town. And she was dragging her feet about leaving town because she was talking about, yeah, but I need to work. And I, for whatever reason, couldn't tell her why we needed to leave town right away, but I was getting increasingly worried because we were running out of time. And then I think even at some point, like, somebody pulled on her dress. And then I woke up in the morning and I told her, like, dude, I had the craziest dream. And she was like, oh my God, I dreamed the same thing. There were even more details that I'm forgetting here, but she told me about her dream, and it was like so many of the details were the same. Like, we're learning the patriotic song and dance routine. She's wearing that dress. Somebody pulls on her dress. I'm trying to get her to leave town. Like, she is not going because she has work. Like, it was crazy. And when I sat with the details, I realized, like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense, actually, that this might have been a real thing that happened to us, because it fit a lot of the elements of the past life spy lifetime. But yeah, if you are not the only one having a dream, then that's a really huge sign that this is a real experience that you and your soulmates have been through. It doesn't have to be on the same night either. Like, one time, for instance, I had a dream about one of these past life spies that we were hanging out, and he tells me that he has done something that he really, really regrets in his role as a spy, like, in order to maintain the ruse. And that was a huge point of the dream I was having. It was like he and I are having this very emotionally loaded moment where he drops this bombshell and he's really struggling with himself, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out, like, how did this happen? How did the game go that far? Like, what do I say? And I never told him about this, but years later, we were randomly talking at one point about past lives, and he was like, yeah, you know, one time I had this dream that, and like, what he told me happened in his dream was the same as what he told me he did in my dream. And he was like, yeah, it really shook me emotionally. And I was like, oh my God, like, you literally told me exactly this in a dream that I had 7.5 years ago. So yes, huge sign if you're not the only one dreaming the thing. It probably happened to you and your soulmates. If you guys would like more information or examples of past life dreams, I'm excited to talk about this. I have had so many over the years, and to be honest with you, there was a time in my life where I wasn't even sure if I believed in reincarnation. At this point, I kind of have to. And I understand it can be kind of humbling to consider that maybe a dream really is from another life, because it's like suddenly you have to sit with the idea that, oh, maybe I have been working through some of these issues, not for the past 20 years or 30 years or whatever, but like for decades or for centuries. And I don't know, I would just say whatever is coming up in a dream that feels like it's from another lifetime, don't judge the information. Just like hold it loosely and just consider, like, maybe it was another life, maybe it wasn't another life. I guess life will tell me what I need to know about it in time, because that's really true. But often if you are seeing something in a dream from another life, it is because these things will become relevant to us eventually. Don't feel obligated to sit there and like try to puzzle out your past life stuff. That's not really the purpose of having a new incarnation, of having a current life. Just have fun with it. Write it down. If you're interested in more ideas on how to work with your past life dream impressions, I would be happy to make a follow-up video. Let me know. But anyway, I hope that you have found this helpful. I hope you have found it entertaining and fun. And yeah, if you liked this, please like, please subscribe, and sweet dreams. And I'll catch you next time.